Uncharted X. My name is Ben, and this video is a continuation of my series looking at the evidence for lost ancient high technology. This one is an interesting tale, and one I've been meaning to tell for quite some time. I originally thought it was going to be a short video, as if I could ever manage to make one of those, but the further I researched, the deeper the rabbit hole went, and I hope you'll enjoy exploring its depths with me. In this episode, I want to explore a couple of the unique features of ancient Egyptian Old Kingdom pyramid sites. Features that are clearly indicative for the use of advanced technology in their creation, which today leave us some tantalizing hints as to functionality and purpose, certainly well beyond the ceremonial or religious label attached by mainstream archaeology to everything that comes from this period. What I'm referring to here is the use of hard basalt stone to create pavements in the structures around specific Old Kingdom pyramid sites. There are several well-known examples of these polished and remarkably flat floors, and wherever they're found, you don't have to look very far for the evidence of machining and advanced forms of stone cutting. Around and on such basalt floors are cutting marks and tool signatures that are quite distinctive, and very different to those made by the primitive and simple hand tools that we know the dynastic Egyptians utilized. In fact, these machining and tool marks seem to indicate the use of very large and even powered machines. They've been a fascination of mine for many years now, and have been investigated and analysed by the likes of Sir Flinders Petrie, Christopher Dunn, and several more mainstream contemporary Egyptologists, and to this day their manufacture and purpose remains both a debate and a mystery. In addition to these basalt floors, Old Kingdom sites have another unique feature, the installation of channeled blocks that run beneath the flooring level of the structures and causeways that surround the pyramids. Indeed, there is evidence for what seems to have been an entire infrastructure of these channels in a subfloor level, which is a very strange feature, if you believe them to have been purely ceremonial temples. Given that they're hidden from sight, below several feet of stone pavement, what ceremonial purpose could these channeled blocks possibly serve? Their existence screams functionality, and when pressed, mainstream Egyptology has described them as a sewer system. But does this look like an appropriate outlet for a sewer? Why would you make a sewer system from incredibly hard stone like quartzite, or from the much sought after white alabaster, or even granite like this channel block at Gyges? All of these are stone types that have to be transported tremendous distances from their quarries to where we find them today. Safe to say that I have a different perspective on these features of Old Kingdom sites, and I hope you'll join me as we investigate these rarely discussed mysteries of some of the most ancient structures found anywhere on planet Earth. We begin with the basalt floors, the most famous example being, of course, the large basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid at Giza, most often used as a convenient resting spot for tourists, vendors, and camels. While most people just sit on this pavement, staring up at the pyramid, a close inspection of the blocks that form it will reveal a large number of plunge cuts, saw cuts, machining marks, and other evidence for advanced stone cutting that cannot be explained by the tools and techniques attributed to the ancient Egyptians. Before we take a closer look at this aspect of the pavement, let's first understand what the material is that we're talking about. Around 90% of the volcanic stone on Earth is basalt, an igneous rock, meaning it was formed with great heat, that may also be plutonic, meaning some types of basalt may have cooled and then hardened underground. As with many other stone types, granite being an example, its common name can cover several different varieties, and basalt is no different. Without delving into the specific geochemistry, the stone that we see at Giza and the other Old Kingdom locations could also be said to be forms of diabase or dolerite, and most basalt is very similar to andesite in composition, distinguished only by its specific percentage of silica. The average density of basalt is actually greater than that of granite, making it a heavier stone to work, and as it's even harder than granite, it's just as challenging, if not more so, to cut and shape. In fact, the very name basalt is a derivative of the Latin basanites, meaning very hard stone. Its specific hardness can vary, but basalt is commonly a 7 or even an 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness. As mentioned, it's harder than granite, and it will easily scratch glass or even steel. Let's just assume that this is a very difficult choice of stone to do stonework in, particularly if you're some poor loincloth-wearing punter with a flint chisel and a copper bar working out in the Egyptian sunshine. It's not only beside the Great Pyramid that we can find evidence of basalt in ancient structures. We also find such basalt floors at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Sir, at the Sahure, Neferkare and Nusra complexes. They are also found at nearby Saqqara, with a large basalt pavement and causeway discovered in the Yusakaf complex. And interestingly, basalt paving blocks were also discovered in the Great Pit below the Step Pyramid of Djoser, a structure that I've explored in some detail in a recent video. The link to that is below. As mentioned, the only significant use of basalt left at Giza today is the pavement that's next to the Great Pyramid, but this is far from the only use of basalt at this site. There were historical reports of basalt being used in the upper or pyramid temple of the Middle Pyramid complex, said to have been that of Pharaoh Khafra, although this cannot be confirmed as there is really no trace of basalt left here in evidence today. The Great Box, or the so-called sarcophagus of the Third Pyramid, attributed to Menkaure, was also made from a single piece of basalt and weighed in at around 3 tons. It was discovered by Howard Weiss when he dynamited his way into the Third Pyramid in 1837. Weiss removed the basalt box from the structure and sent it back to England on board a merchant ship called the Beatrice. The Beatrice, though, never arrived in England, as on around October 13th of 1838, she encountered a storm in the Mediterranean and
welcome,
sank,
Spotty Power.
bearing her ancient treasure with her to the bottom of the ocean, and has yet to be found. There was a considerable amount of other antiquities from Egypt on board, along with the priceless stone box, and the Beatrice is but one of the many ships loaded with the treasure of ancient Egypt to be lost at sea. At the very least, a number of massive granite obelisks are also currently lying at the bottom of the ocean, thanks to shipwrecks and the nature of man. What I find particularly remarkable about the ancients' use of basalt is that it was only something that seems to have been done in the earliest parts of the Old Kingdom, and this is something even acknowledged by mainstream Egyptology. From the perspective of said mainstream history, it's a mystery as to why the use of basalt is not something that we see in later periods, or anything beyond structures attributed to the 6th dynasty. Further, it's long been a puzzle for Egyptologists as to exactly why this difficult stone was used in Old Kingdom architecture, given its intractable nature. Of course, any such explanation for this simply must be framed within the ceremonial/religious temple perspective that Egyptologists classify all such architecture within. It's not like the theology, rituals, or culture of ancient dynastic Egypt drastically changed beyond this early period. So why do we only see these remarkable machined pavements in the oldest of pyramid complexes? In 1993, James K. Hoffmeyer authored a paper published in the Journal of the American Research Center in Egypt, looking at this specific element of ancient sites. It was titled, "The Use of Basalt in Floors in Old Kingdom Pyramid Temples." Quoting from Hoffmeyer's paper, quote, "Over the years there has been considerable scholarly discussion devoted to the function of the various structures of Old Kingdom pyramid complexes. The explanations offered for the purpose of the Valley or Lower Temple and the Funerary or Upper Temple have found little
What's up, Nick?
What I'd like to do is examine one feature of the
program you follow,
which has been recognized by scholars, but has not been taken into account when formulating theories on the function of the lower.
I'll do my final set and I can show you the
basalt has been found as flooring in a number of other temples. Those suggestions to explain its presence are lacking. 3 basalt paving blocks were discovered by C.M. Firth and J.E. Quibble in the Great Pit of the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, but this may not have been their original locus. At Giza, virtually all that remains of the funeral temple of Khufu is the floor, which is made of basalt. Firth's clearing of the pyramid complex of Yusakaf at Saqqara in 1928-29 revealed a basalt pavement in the open court of the upper temple, measuring 35 by 21 meters. Connected to this, on the south side of the sanctuary, were 2 chambers on either side of the 6-pillared niche that were paved with black basalt. On the east side of the pyramid, Firth uncovered a chamber that he called a small offering place, which likewise had a basalt floor. And finally, the causeway was also covered with basalt.
Oh, nice, buddy. That's good.
Parts of the upper temples of Sahure, Neferkare, and Nusra.
So I do bench press.
Also have basalt pavements.
Bicep curls.
Not much of it remains in situ
flies.
in Sahure's temple. That of
Abs.
Nusra,
I do leg
however,
raises,
well
V-sits. Some nunchuck work and legs that do exercise like yoga and plyometrics.
According to Dieter Arnold, there are no traces of basalt pavements in the 12th dynasty pyramid complexes at Lish and Dashur, where he has investigated.
I did all my break of work. Nice.
In general,
sick,
the use
man.
of basalt was
Nice.
limited after the Old Kingdom, concludes J.R. Harris in his study of the lexicography of Egyptian minerals. Thus, it appears that the use of basalt in funerary structures is restricted to the Old Kingdom and in the Saqqara, Abusir, and Giza necropolises. End quote. Hoffmeyer goes on to discuss the potential quarry locations as a source of this basalt.
That looks a lot bigger now.
which most
Yo,
likely came
thanks,
from an area
buddy.
just north of the Fayoum, a well-known depression to the west of the Nile and around 60 kilometers south
yeah,
of Giza,
sometimes.
still visible on
Gotta
satellite
work my
imagery
job,
today
nice.
as this green leaf-shaped agricultural zone. I've discussed the Fayoum
Nice, man.
in several
What's your
videos,
job,
as
dude?
it's home to many ancient sites, including Hawara and the
Yeah,
famed
sometimes.
lost labyrinth of ancient Egypt.
Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy.
An ancient basalt quarry was discovered
Thanks,
here in 1987 at a place called Widan El Faras, and there are even remnants of an ancient road partly paved in basalt leading south towards Lake Moeris. Further quoting Hoffmeyer's paper, quote, "The distance between this new quarry and the necropolises of Giza, 58 kilometres, and Saqqara, 61 kilometres, is not that great when compared with the distance required for shipping granite from Aswan. However, it was a considerable undertaking to quarry the hard stone and transport it to Giza. Besides this consideration, the complexity of installing a basalt pavement, which involved sawing and pounding the blocks into shape, must also be considered. This factor forces one to ask, why go to the additional trouble and expense of bringing basalt for paving Khufu's upper temple floor, rather than using local material or even the bedrock?" End quote. Why indeed? And why is there evidence on this basalt of far more than simple sawing or pounding? Hoffmeyer does go on to speculate for a ceremonial religious purpose for the basalt pavements in his paper, but does not concern himself further with any analysis or investigation into how they were manufactured. For this,
Warehouse
we must
work,
turn
nice.
to a couple of my favourite figures
Oh, wow,
in the
nice,
field
man.
of ancient engineering and manufacturing, both historical and
I'm finally
contemporary.
eating right and it's
Flinders
showing. Yo,
Petrie
thanks,
and
man.
Christopher Dunn. Along with the tubular drills and evidence for lathe-worked stone vessels,
I used to work.
both
I
topics
used
that
to
I've
work in a
discussed
warehouse
at length
before
in other videos.
with Hasways and
Flinders
stuff.
Petrie also discussed the evidence for circular saw use and machining of hard stone.
Yeah,
in
that's
his
a lot of,
excellent book,
you'll get
The
fit
Pyramids
very
and Temples
fast
of
like
Giza,
that.
published first in 1883. He cites several examples and collected fragments of cut basalt from the pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid. Quoting the great Sir William Flinders Petrie, quote,
Yo, thanks.
"The examples of saw cuts figured in plate 14 are as follows. Number 1, from the end of the Great Pyramid coffer of granite, showing where the saw cut was run too deep into the stuff twice over and backed out again. Number 2, a piece of cyanide picked up at Memphis, showing cuts on 4 faces of it, and the breadth of the saw by a cut across the top of it. This probably was a waste piece from cutting out a statue in the rough. Number 3, a piece of basalt, showing a saw cut run askew and abandoned, with the sawing dust and sand left in it, a fragment from the sawing of the great basalt pavement on the east of the Great Pyramid. Number 4, another piece from the same pavement, showing regular and well-defined lines.
Of
Number
Doritos.
5, a slice of basalt
You're
from the
killing
same
it.
place,
Yo, thanks,
sawn
Blue
on
Fire.
both sides
Thanks,
and
Blue
nearly
Fire.
sawn in 2.
I need your motivation.
Number 6, a slice of
That's
diorite
it.
bearing
Thank you,
equidistant and
Fire. That's so
regular
nice.
grooves
How
of
are you?
circular arcs,
So good to hear from
parallel
you.
to one another. These
I just
grooves
feel like
have
I was
been
born to
really
be
polished
God.
out by cross-grinding, but still are visible.
Nice, man.
The only feasible explanation of this piece is that it was produced by
Oh,
a
thanks.
circular
Thanks so
saw.
much for being here, everyone.
The main examples of sawing at Giza are the blocks of the Great Basalt Pavement and the coffers of the Great Second
How are you, Blue
and
Fire?
Third
Hope
Pyramids,
things are good.
the latter unhappily now lost." End quote. Petrie, both in his book and in his later letters and addresses to the Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, distinguishes the method used to make these marks on these examples against those left by grinding techniques using quartz, sand or other abrasives, which is the technique asserted by mainstream Egyptology today to have been the only possible method of ancient Egyptian stone cutting. Petrie states numerous times that these examples are the results of stone cutting, likely with a fixed point of an unknown material that is nonetheless much harder than the granite or basalt, and not the result of grinding. Not only that, but note Petrie's mention of a circular saw, which is definitely not something supposed to have been in the ancient Egyptians' toolbox. We'll come back around to circular saws.
Doing alright. It's been a rough few days. Hoping things will turn around soon. Oh no, why is that?
Stone and cutting it is an important point, because this is where the debate, such
Why is
as
that,
it
Blue
is,
Fire?
still lies today, some
Everything's
150
okay.
years later. Engineer and precision manufacturing expert Christopher Dunn, in his excellent book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, furthered the work of Petrie with his analysis of the evidence for advanced stone cutting into basalt granite. As you can see in this footage, the basalt pavement mentioned by Petrie is full of such examples, and although Petrie only mentions 3 of them, there are at least a dozen different blocks here with all sorts of marks still left on them. From plunge cuts where a blade has been dipped into the material and then back down, to the striations left.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, Dick. You do look like a Greek god, man.
As their edges were shaved or worked. Most of these cut marks are from the sides of the blocks and would not normally have been visible if the pavement was intact, but as it has been left in a state of ruin over the millennia, the sides of the blocks and their markings are now visible. Most of these marks are likely the result of a multi-step process, from the roughing out of the block, the fitting and shaving of it on site, and its ultimate precision fit and polished top surface as part of the overall pavement. I say likely, as although there is much to learn and analyse from these marks, it's difficult to ever be certain as to exactly how or why they were made. Quoting Christopher Dunn, quote, "Without going back in time and talking to the pyramid builder, it is impossible to explain every anomalous action that created the complex variety of evidence on the basalt pavement. Considering that the now exposed blocks that reveal these saw cuts were originally covered by adjacent blocks, it is not unreasonable to
now it's too late for you to take before photos.
Quick shave in order to remove irregularities that were inherent in the quarrying process.
Hey man, we got the original first stream May 22nd, 2020. That was the first workout stream.
This quick shave was more than likely given by the only tools available on the site.
Still on Twitch. Yeah, female stuff. Oh no.
All of the blocks that went into
wow.
building the pyramid. It is well known that these blocks are extremely precise.
Have motivation to work out. That's all good. It's just I find once you do like the first, second set, everything becomes a lot easier. You know.
It could be argued, therefore, that the
do 1 or 2 sets of like everything, and then everything gets easier. Fine.
End quote. What is
like today my first 2 sets were a little rough, but now I'm feeling pretty good.
Are the result of some form of sawing or grinding, and not the result of pounding stones, flint or copper chisels, which are the tools so often quoted as the primary methods of ancient Egyptian
running out of antidepressants.
It's here that mainstream archaeology gets itself into.
Oh, thank you, Blue Fire. That's so sweet. That's so nice of you. Thank you. That's so kind.
Pavement, but as Petrie described, also on the boxes or sarcophagi.
Stream, I think it was late June.
And on large granite slabs.
Now I'm
pumped. By other methods.
Thanks, man.
An attempt at explaining them was made by Robert G. Moores Jr. in an
Just trying to be like Dick, man. Follow Dick, Real Return of the Dragon on Instagram.
Egyptians, published in 1991 in the Journal of the American Research Center in Egypt. Although this is
Dick
a
on Instagram.
mainstream Egyptology attempt at explaining these marks, with Moore's proposed solution of this drag saw,
Thanks,
he had no alternative.
Hope you're doing good. You're doing well.
Quote, the degree of mechanization indicated by this operation is
you are. I saw you streaming the other day.
General views of the pyramid builders' technology level now hold, and also that the sawing done in this place represents a sophisticated operation of a mature industry. End quote. Chris Dunn made a thorough analysis of Moore's proposed solution, and it is in this analysis that we can begin to see just how weak the mainstream case is for some form of relatively primitive grinding technique to explain the evidence written in the stone. First, let's describe what Moore proposed, quoting Christopher Dunn. Quote, Morse proposes a blade made of copper with a notched leading edge. The blade was 157 inches 4 meters long and 23.6 inches 60 centimeters broad, and was wedge-shaped from 0.393 inch or 1 centimeter at the top to 0.118 inches or 3 millimeters at the cutting edge. Morse estimates the weight of the blade was 308 pounds or 140 kilograms. Quartz sand was used in the process as an abrasive. It was rubbed against the basalt both as a loose medium and also by quartz sand that was embedded into the copper. This process, with fresh sand being added to the cut as used sand and sawed rock was flushed away, impressed the shape of the blade into the basalt. As we see in the figure, a team of workers dragged a blade across a block that was fixed inside a trench filled with water. The blade was suspended on ropes that were controlled by workers.
Okay, my Pilates. Yo, RNTV Barra, man. What's up, buddy?
End quote.
This is not my Pilates, it's my plyometrics.
Description of the blade and the image of its theoretical operation, you can begin to imagine some of the practical mechanical problems with this proposed solution. And this is only the beginning of the issues with the mainstream explanation. Quote, "It is hard to imagine the successful employment of the physics of a pendulum on a swinging 308-pound object that ultimately is met with a hard, solid surface covered in sand. If we take into consideration the fact that the blade is wedge-shaped, which would mean its increasing width would impede its progress into the slot, the impossibility of the operation becomes more evident." End quote. Where it gets truly ridiculous is with Moore's collaborative cutting with such a setup. Admittedly, he does state that this is the best case estimate, but according to his paper, a single cycle of this saw, one back and forth motion,
thank you, Bara. Thank you, Blue Phoenix. Thank you.
And with a swing time of around 2.84 seconds, it would cut at a rate of 42 millimeters or 1.653 inches per minute. Let's put some of these rates into context. As explained by Chris Dunn, United States patent number 7082939, filed in 2003, describes an improved frame saw using carbon alloy steel blades impregnated with diamonds, and cites a downfeed rate into granite of 30 millimeters or 1.18 inches, not per minute, but per hour. This modern rate of granite cutting using powered saws with diamond-tipped blades is 84 times less than the rate cited by Moore with his copper drag saw using sand and human power. Like I said, it's truly ridiculous. And bear in mind here that we're also comparing the modern rate of cutting into granite, while Moore is citing a rate of cutting into basalt, which is harder and therefore even more difficult to cut than granite. The fun doesn't stop here either, because we do have some indication of just how long it takes to cut.
Nothing any results? Thanks, buddy. Thanks, man.
Experimental archaeologist Dennis Stocks, who I've mentioned on this channel
so honored.
in my
So
videos
flattered.
on tubular drills,
honestly,
has experimented
that's
with
so nice of you.
human-powered
It's
copper
nice of you,
saws
Dick,
using
and
sand to
Blue,
grind through
and Bara,
granite.
and Spottier.
Although I do think that Mr. Stocks does ignore some of the evidence.
Shouldn't take treating constantly, need to cycle on and off?
With a very specific outcome.
I don't know.
I do want to say that this sort of testing is a very good thing and should be applauded, as ultimately this sort of data should help us to get closer to the truth. In 1999, Stocks tested a much smaller setup of this drag saw, with a blade 1.8 meters or 5.9 feet long, 15 centimeters or 5.9 inches deep, and 6 millimeters or 0.236 inches thick. It weighed in at 14.5 kilos or 32 pounds and was further assisted by stone weights on each end, adding another 45 kilograms or 99 pounds to the blade. Using both dry and wet sand,
I've done it dry, I've done it wet, and the wet is much better.
And cutting different lengths in granite between 2 and 3 feet long, these were the observations and results from Dennis Stocks' test. Firstly, a hand-powered saw advances more slowly into the granite over a longer cut than it does into a shorter one. I'll illustrate why this is important shortly, but in general, the actual rate of granite removal stays the same. His results varied between 0.105 and 0.084 inches per hour, around 2.1 to 2.7 millimeters per hour feed rate into the granite. A far cry from Moore's 42 millimeters per minute, and some 14 times less than the rate quoted by our modern diamond-tipped frame saw example. Also worthy of note here is that the copper of the blade is ground away by the sand, just like the granite, and Stocks reported losing nearly half a kilogram of copper from his blade over 14 hours of use. Using these material removal rates, Chris Dunn estimated how long it might have taken to simply rough out the granite box that is found inside the middle pyramid, the so-called sarcophagus attributed to Khafra. We're not talking about the finishing or polishing of the box, nor about hollowing it out and forming the internal surfaces and corners. This is purely making the 6 basic cuts to shape the box, the top and bottom, and the north, south, east, and west faces. Based on Dennis Stocks' result, it would have taken some 6,270 hours of grinding with a copper bar to make these cuts.
As you can see here, we achieved this in just a few days.
That's more than 261 days of 24 hours a day, non-stop work, just to get the basic shape of the box completed. And there's probably far more work involved in hollowing it out, finishing it, and then polishing it after that step. This is where it gets really fun. With all that we've now established about the orthodox view of ancient and primitive Valley Temple, which is made from blocks of granite and diorite, some of them up to 70 tons, as was the original Upper or Pyramid Temple, as were countless other structures, which have now all been quarried and gone. The basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid. The huge 70-ton granite beams in the Great Pyramid's upper chamber. The likewise huge and precision-cut 70-ton blocks of the Assyrian structure in Upper Egypt. The granite casing stones of the Third Pyramid. The examples of large precision-cut granite, basalt or diorite blocks are endless, and all of them had to be hewn and sawed into their rough shape before then being precisely shaved down and fitted. Given the established rates of cutting and the methods described by Egyptologists, does this seem like a remotely reasonable proposition, given that each of them may have taken the best part of a year to cut by hand? Blocks alone aren't even close to all there is when it comes to granite either. You also have all of the massive single-piece columns. The obelisks, the 400, 800 and 1,000-ton statues. As well as the many single-piece stone boxes, not the least of which are the 24 huge and enigmatic boxes of the Serapeum at Saqqara.
Yeah, it's fragile, obviously.
Remember that according to mainstream experts like Dennis Stocks, the longer the cut, the slower the progress. Try to imagine the rough shaping of a Serapeum box, some of which are more than 15 feet long. How long would it take to make this long axis cut on one of these boxes, and where do they get the time? Perhaps a better question is, where do they get the copper for all of this theoretical grinding? Recall that copper wears away at a prodigious rate as the stone is ground down. A single copper drag saw would be lucky to last even a full cut through something the size of your average 8-ton granite box. In the comments on my videos and in my emails, I all too often get the question of where are the tools when discussing the evidence for ancient machining. But this question could also be applied to the mainstream explanation. No copper saws of the type described by Moores have ever been found, and neither have the smaller yet still substantial type of drag saw that was used by Dennis Stocks in order to make his 2 to 3 feet long cuts in his experiments. There is another and perhaps even larger issue for the mainstream theory here also, and that is that the specific nature of the tool marks, the striations and cuts that we can observe on ancient basalt and granite, support an entirely more sophisticated solution than a simple flat bar drag saw that is grinding away at it with sand. In fact, some of these marks flat out disprove that a flat drag saw was the tool used to cut the stone. Remember in the earlier quote from Flinders Petrie, when he wrote that the only possible explanation for some of the markings was the use of a circular saw? Although the use of circular saws to cut stone in antiquity is summarily dismissed by mainstream Egyptology, including by Robert Morse in his paper proposing flat drag saws, they cannot cite any specific evidence for this dismissal, and they have no explanation for striations and marks such as these, which are probably the very best example of circular saw use that I know of. This is a huge block of basalt nearly sawn all the way through, with consistent curved striations, and even a lip on the edge of the cut,
I'm just going to read it.
Of the width of the blade, only a few millimeters. It is obviously the product of a circular saw, and quite a big one at that. By extrapolating the curve, we can estimate the diameter of this saw could have been as large as 9 meters, or almost 30 feet. Try explaining this cut with your loincloth-wearing, stone-pounding society. Many more circular striations and curved cuts can also be found at Abu Sir, and, as Flinders Petrie mentioned, they're also found on the basalt pavement at Giza. Another notorious example of circular saw use is found on a particular slab of granite at the Old Kingdom site of Abu Rawash. Rarely visited as it requires special permission to access, and I had the chance to visit this site in late 2020 for the first time. This is a remarkable piece of granite. When viewed from the top, it is quite obviously the result of a cut made with a circular saw. This piece gets far more complex, however, when you realise it is also concave and has been cut with a consistent radius both horizontally and vertically.
Better chest workout, dumbbells, not use more triceps at the bar. Interesting.
Where one of the cuts was not quite finished.
I see the creatine back and forth discussion. Very nice, very nice. Well, I drink it every day, I guess.
Thank you so much.
Just FYI.
Yeah. See how this one here.
Naturally thick legs.
Yeah, this lip looks like a reflector or something.
Nice, very nice.
It's really powerful.
Reason cycle
These
it.
ones.
Very nice.
So this, in my opinion, Dr. Zai Hawass is in the field. They didn't make this officially to be for tea, but we can reuse it to put the teacup. So we can see the striations. Clearly the cut ended here, but we can see that it's not a flat surface.
How about creatine, by the way? Nice. Yes, really nice.
If this was part of a box, then this was an inside cut. You can imagine that this used to be another piece like that here, or that it was coiled from something else, or it was even a corner, so it's an inner cut, which make it even hard to have a saw cutting this way. Yeah, but on a smaller scale, I would see figures like this if I using my 6mm Dremel tool, spinning like a cone shape, not a cone shape, but like a circular one that is straight, and I will be like, it will be rotated, for example, like that, and I will be moving with it like, will give very similar figures. This is, for me, is the closest result on the stone.
Yeah.
Of course, if you are familiar with the research of Christopher Dunn, so he believes the pit here could be used for a giant saw, but I didn't like the drawings because they put the piece of stone in the bottom of the pit. That will be a very hard challenge to put the granite stone down there. But it will be more.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Sorry, I'm not in a mood to read out everything. I did read everything that was written. I can't. I'm going to change, I think, to not verbally reading everything.
He suggested it was two cuts that were made, one that was cut this way, and then one disc, if you can imagine it rotating this way.
I don't know, I just buy in the blend mix already.
This dip, and then that's also where that cut ended here, or one of them.
I agree with this part, because this looks here like the spinning was running
Like this, and then moving this way.
Yeah, they're moving that way. Really big. If you pour the water on it,
You won't see it.
you would never be able to see the striations. But do you see the striations?
Very fine.
What would the skeptics say about this one? I understand the striations may show up when you do a bronze
Exactly how this block was shaped is a real puzzle, and I'll leave a further analysis of this piece for an upcoming video on Abu Rawash. But safe to say that the mainstream has no explanation for it, and as far as I know has not even attempted to account for it within the primitive toolbox of the dynastic Egyptians. It should be noted that there is evidence for both straight saws and circular saws. Indeed, a variety of tools may have been used in the different stages of ancient stone processing. One of my favourite pieces that demonstrates several different saw marks, both straight and circular, is found tucked away in a corner at Abu Sir. It's a beautiful piece of high-density quartzite, with just breathtaking colours that are revealed with a quick splash of water. This slab has been worked down to flat surfaces and seems to have been in the process of final shaping and shaving down, likely intended for a precision fit somewhere. We have fine tool marks on the edges of straight saws, just lightly touching the material, and then there is also evidence of deeper circular saw-like tools on its top surface. It's almost entirely cut through on its end, and it looks like it was broken or snapped from a larger piece. Seems like the type of block that should be subject to a deeper investigation from experts, but I'm just grateful that it's still here for us to look at and hasn't been carted off to gather dust in a storeroom somewhere. Chris Dunn has analysed the block at Abu Rawash, as well as the tool marks that are left at Giza in great detail, coming to the same conclusion as did Petrie, and he also commented on the mainstream's strange resistance to the idea of circular saws. Quoting Chris Dunn, quote, "Before we return to Abu Rawash, we must resolve the differences between Petrie's observations and Moore's with respect to the use of circular saws. The evidence Moore's was looking at would certainly point to the use of straight saws. Yet there are other blocks on the pavement that pose a problem to the notion of the exclusive use of straight saws. Another block lies a short distance away from the pavement and would go unnoticed by the casual traveller unless he or she stumbled over it. That block can't be explained by the use of straight saws, because the surface is curved in a way that would eliminate the random arcing of a blade or any amount of uncontrolled meandering by a shaky operator. Figure 1024 contains 3 views of this basalt block that, when viewed from the side at an angle, the saw cut seen in figure 1024A ends with a radius. Without examining the block further, it could be argued that a hand-operated straight saw created the cut, and that the operators of the saw did not keep the saw straight as it moved through the cut, but instead allowed it to drift up and down. This is a common occurrence, and in fact achieving a perfectly straight cut with a hand-powered saw is almost impossible. Fully impossible is the achievement of a concave radius, for the obvious reason that it is physically impossible to create a saw cut where the entrance and exit points are higher than the middle with a flat-edged straight saw. Some may argue that the saw could bend and create this condition, and indeed they are more than welcome to prove their claim. Stocks did not observe this condition during his experiments, and neither have I during my experience working with hand saws that were thinner than Stocks. Along with Petrie's testimony to the use of circular saws at Giza, what we can gain from this block is further evidence that efficient
Gonna be
circular
up to the
tools
work,
were
Norris.
used on the Giza plateau.
Got my butt now,
Though
nice.
we are still
Aw,
left
thank you,
to
Blue
wonder
Fire.
about what they looked like, how they were driven, and from what material they
Thanks,
were
Blue
made.
Fire. You rule.
End quote. Dunn goes into far greater depth in his analysis, and
I
if
hope
you're
you-
interested in
yeah,
reading
you'll be
further on
okay
these
without the
topics,
antidepressants.
and the many other
It's-
undeniable proofs for the use of advanced technology
Yeah,
in the
you'll be
architecture of
okay.
ancient Egypt, I'd highly
I don't know.
recommend picking up a
I've
copy
never
of
been
this
on.
book.
I've never been on antidepressants, but
So why is it that mainstream
sure there might be a little bit of body
Egyptologists
shock,
so
but I mean it's
steadfastly
body
refuse to
adjusting.
acknowledge this evidence? Indeed, much like in the case of the tilted photograph of Petrie's famous drill core number 7,
But I'm guessing you're
they
gonna
seem to be
re-up.
willing to go
I'm
to
not
any
sure.
length in order to deny it, either by simply ignoring or dismissing evidence out of hand, or in some cases like this, through obfuscation and logical fallacies, if not outright deception. I think this is because the implications of such evidence threaten the very foundations of the story of human civilization on this planet as we know it. This is the same story that the academics in their ivory towers, with their tenure and their textbooks, serve as its experts and high priests. This evidence should have a strong impact on our assumptions about the most ancient parts of our history. Yet it doesn't, and the many valuable lessons we could be learning from a more honest assessment of our own species' history are being held hostage by an establishment hell-bent on never admitting defeat and on protecting their own positions of power. This This evidence implies that something far more sophisticated was going on than just a hard-working, loincloth-wearing primitive ancient civilization who had nothing better to do than spend all day banging rocks together in order to create ceremonial cemeteries. Which, if you have ever noticed, is exactly how the history books depict this work. Personally, I always laugh when I see images like these. The evidence for advanced tools and the precision we find in the most
Thanks for the
ancient
support. You are
structures
such
and
genuine brand of
objects
sweet.
implies
Aw,
some sort of
thanks.
function
Aw, thanks.
well beyond the
Thanks,
capabilities
Fire,
of
you're
the
cool.
dynastic Egyptian civilization
Come on,
was the
kill
result
it.
of all of this work. There is one more aspect
You are too,
of
Blue
old
Fire, what
kingdom
can I
sites
say?
that I want to briefly, at least as briefly as I'm capable of, cover
You rule.
in this video.
Thank you.
And that is something that has a direct relationship to some sort of function on these ancient sites. There is evidence for an extensive infrastructure of channeled blocks having been installed in the subfloor level across many Old Kingdom pyramid sites. These are also known as U-shaped blocks, and they are often made from limestone, alabaster, or quartzite, although other stone types may well have been used. The best example is at Abu Sir, where much of this infrastructure is still visible in situ, beneath the quarried remnants of basalt and granite that made up the floor. If you ever have the chance to visit this site, take note at the very bottom of the causeway, commonly where you enter it, and look down. You will find exposed channel blocks that once ran beneath the full length of the causeway. As you walk around the ruins of the great courtyards of Sahure and Nusra, you can follow the infrastructure of channel blocks installed into the level beneath the pavement. In one spot, a quartzite channel block appears to exit into a well-formed quartzite bowl. On other Old Kingdom sites, there are only a few solitary channel blocks to be found, the barest remnant of what once was here, with the rest long since quarried and removed, along with the pavements and structure they once ran beneath. We can find a few channel blocks at Saqqara, again in an area that ran beneath a basalt pavement. Here is a single solitary channel block lying out in the desert of Dashur,
Oh, man.
near the mighty Bent Pyramid.
Oh no, I'm not sweet. I'm RBF. What's RBF?
There are but a couple
With a
of
blue
blocks still
with no
visible in the
bullshit
complex
to the
of
match.
the
People
middle
don't come to me
pyramid
for
of Giza.
sweet. For rough honesty, same. What's
Keith
RBF?
Hamilton, the
What is
author
that?
of the many excellent and highly recommended layman's guides to ancient structures, pointed out to me in an email that these blocks are also found at the 4th dynasty structure known as the Mastabat el Faraun. In each case, these channel blocks were originally beneath the floor tiles of pavements and even causeways, and they seem to have been run all over the place, with features like bends and Y-joints and junctions still in evidence. What was their purpose? What were they for?
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at that word.
Were they
My
used
boss
to
told me
house
the other
something
day.
like copper
What?
piping? Or to serve as a conduit
way.
for something running beneath the
You
heavy
guys are the
stone
best.
pavements?
Don't listen to those others.
One thing seems certain. They cannot have been ceremonial, as in the original structures they would not have been visible at all.
man.
This fact alone screams function, and the
That's
only
it, you're the
explanation I've ever
realist.
heard given by mainstream archaeology
You're the
is
truest.
as a sewer system. Really?
The realist.
Do you think they were installing toilets in their funeral temples? Did the mummies need to occasionally get out of their granite boxes and drop a deuce? Did the royal dung need to be transported in blocks made from alabaster or quartzite? Or does this look like an appropriate collection point for Pharaoh's morning movements?
Do not go in there. Woo!
Naturally, I jest, but there really isn't any other explanation for it. These U-shaped blocks and this infrastructure just isn't ceremonial, as explained here by my friend and expert guide Yusuf Ayawan, in reference to the U-shaped blocks at Saqqara that happen to be made out of Egyptian alabaster.
Yeah, it's all about just starting. Blue Fire, it's all about just starting. Like, I didn't know how many sets I'd be able to do today, and I've already done more than what I was hoping for.
But if it's something functional, then it's a different story. Because if I brought it from far away for something functional and decorational, then I will still have it here above the ground. Now it's going to be moving. Then what difference is it going to make? If I use any other type, granite or limestone or anything, to have these water channels, these water channels, if you are running home, then you need to be a shower.
So, what can we evidence of functionality and of advanced capability in some of the oldest known structures on Earth. Once again, we have an example of the inverse technological progression logic, that somehow the most advanced and hardest forms of stonework took place in the earliest periods of known ancient civilizations. It's a point that I've made several times, but according to mainstream history, the Old Kingdom was the first period of ancient Egypt, yet it is also the Old Kingdom that was somehow responsible for its greatest works, including the mighty pyramids of Giza, Meidum, and Dashur, as well as the crafting of the most megalithic stonework, massive blocks made from literally hundreds of thousands of tons of some of the hardest forms of natural rock, things like granite, basalt, diorite, and quartzite. Later periods of Egypt were, quite simply, not able to replicate these works. In fact, they commonly pillaged and quarried from the Old Kingdom structures in order to build their own. Even the famous dream stele that sits between the paws of the Sphinx, the one that tells the story of Thutmose IV, this was chiseled into a recycled piece of granite that was taken from an Old Kingdom structure. Based on all observable history and our own civilization's rise to technological sophistication, this immediate appearance of advanced capability in the Old Kingdom, right out of the Stone Age no less, and then the subsequent loss of capability in later periods, runs contrary to everything we know about how civilizations progress. It just doesn't
What's up,
make
man?
sense.
What's up, Cloud?
And it's one of the
Thanks,
most
buddy.
glaring logical inconsistencies in the mainstream story of history.
I'm good, man. Thanks,
The same
buddy.
can be said for the megalithic cultures of South America.
How you doing, buddy?
Mainstream history in this
I guess
region
I'm
tells a
streaming over
similar
my
story
lunch
of
break,
backwards logic, but in much shorter time
which is
frames.
why I guess England
The
can
Inca
see me.
civilization, supposedly responsible
What's up,
for the
dude? How you doing,
megalithic
man?
work in Cusco and the Sacred Valley of Peru, also appear to have had an immediate
Nice to see you again. Yo,
capability
I see you
to do
again, man.
massive and precise stonework, with the biggest and best work being on the lowest or
man.
earliest layers of architecture.
Oh.
Yet they also seem to have lost this capability, and not over centuries or millennia, but rather in just decades, regressing to a form of very primitive stonework, that which is found on top of the huge megalithic walls in places like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo. No better example of this can be found than an examination of the
I'm good, thanks.
courtyards
Nice.
of the successive High Inca rulers, of which there were only 13. The first 8 rulers created megalithic courtyards, but the 9th through 13th could only manage courtyards built from small local stone. Why do you think this is? Do either of these civilization narratives really make any sense? Or is it more likely that the advanced works were discovered and inherited by the known ancient cultures? We should always remember that we're looking at the skeletons of many cultures, of many civilizations, and we should always be open-minded and embrace evidence where we can find it. Sadly, though, this doesn't seem to be
Alright,
the
I'm
case
gonna
with our
ride the
current
bike
crop
now.
of establishment archaeologists. That said, if I've learned anything from developing this channel, it's that there is certainly hope for the future. The next generation of archaeologists seem much more open-minded, and there are many excellent independent researchers investigating various aspects of our history, and we're all connected through the internet, allowing the fast dissemination of new ideas. The history impacting evidence coming from adjacent fields of science, things like the human genetic timeline, the climate history of the planet with the Younger Dryas, and further technological proof for a lost ancient global civilization is only getting stronger and stronger.
What is that? What's
One
the
day,
female?
I
Why
do
is the
believe
female
that the works
sign?
of people like Graham Hancock and Christopher Dunn will be vindicated and valued for what they are. After all, it's a constant of science.
I call him
exemplified
biking
by historical
a,
figures like Copernicus and Galileo with the heliocentric model, Ignaz Semmelweis with germ theory, and J. Harlan Bretz with catastrophism, that new scientific discoveries come from the fringe and are generally opposed by the establishment, only to be later proven correct. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching. Alright, well there it is. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I enjoyed putting it together. It's been quite a grind for the last few weeks trying to put this video together. I wanted it to be something like my video about the tube drills, which is a real deep dive into a particular aspect of machining and a particular category of evidence that we can find on some of these Old Kingdom sites. So yeah, and it's also something that hints at some sort of functionality. So it's, I know I've covered some of these topics a little bit in the past, but I wanted to specifically kind of deep dive into the saw cuts and then also talk about those channeled blocks that seem to run underneath the floor levels. They're just really mysterious to me as to why they would have been used for any decorational purpose. I think that it really screams at something functional. So speaking of something functional, stick around after this little segment here where I'm going to thank a few people because I'm going to kind of do a little postscript here talking about a very strange feature in the stone itself. It's something that I've seen at Abu Sir, also at Karnak Temple, that kind of also seems like it could possibly be related to something functional on these sites. A little bit of bonus footage at the end of this, so stick around for that. But before we get to that footage, I do want to take a few minutes here to thank a few specific people and just in general say a big thank you to everybody that does support my work through that value for value model. It really is the only way that I'm able to spend the time that it takes to research and make these videos. I also want to acknowledge and thank several people that kind of go above and beyond in terms of supporting the channel, and I try to do that by issuing both executive producer credits and associate executive producer credits. These are real credits. They work just the same as Hollywood credits. They'll work wherever such credits are accepted. I know some people like to put them on their LinkedIn or on their resume, and of course I'll vouch for them too. If anybody asks questions, if they want to come back to me, I'll happily vouch for these credits. So starting with the executive producer credits, and these are for people that have supported my work in amounts of $200 or more. I've got a few people here to thank. Chris Partney. Chris came in with, I think, a $300 donation on Twitch. It kind of rocked me back in my chair. I was doing a Twitch stream and we were chatting away, and he sort of dropped a donation on me. So thanks very much, Chris Partney, CH Partney. Looking forward to chatting with you. I do stream fairly regularly, at least 3 days a week over on Twitch. You can find all the links for those below. Along the same lines, Antonio Casseljevic, sorry, Antcas, also through Twitch. He, right after Chris actually dropped $200 on me in that stream. Like you guys kind of made me sit back in silence for a little while after that. I was trying to process it. So thank you very much for that also, Antcas. Greatly appreciated. And again, looking forward to seeing you in more of the streams going forward. Northern Investments, hit me up on PayPal for This is the well-known step pyramid of Saqqara, attributed to the pharaoh Djoser of the 3rd dynasty, who lived during the early part of the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt, somewhere around 2680 BC. This structure was supposedly designed and built by the famous architect and polymath Imhotep. It is often cited in Orthodox history as being the prototype pyramid or the first pyramid. Some say it gained this shape by virtue of being a series of stacked mastabas, which are flat, square-like structures used as tombs by multiple ancient cultures, and then it was expanded into the stepped shape that we can all see today. The pyramid has been undergoing renovation work by the authorities in Egypt for roughly the last 15 years, and has been closed to the general public during this time. Recently, however, in 2019, this work was completed, and now the step pyramid can be entered through what is known as the Persian Tunnel. This isn't the original entrance to the structure, but one that was dug in later millennia by the Persian civilization, presumably in the search for buried treasure, as even in those times the wealth of ancient Egypt was well known. Many people might have seen footage or photos from beneath other pyramids, the ones at Giza, for example, which have extensive passageways and constructed rooms. What greets you beneath the step pyramid, however, is something else entirely. This structure has been built over a huge open shaft that descends into the bedrock of Saqqara to around 90 feet or 30 meters deep. At the bottom of the shaft lies a massive multi-piece granite box, naturally labelled as the burial chamber, although nothing was found inside this structure except for granite fragments and the remains of a human foot, which was carbon dated to somebody who lived centuries after the time of Gyges and the Third Dynasty. As impressive as this site is, what's even more impressive is what lies deeper beneath this chamber and the box, and what was then found down there. Below this chamber are literal miles of tunnels in a labyrinth that was carved into the bedrock below the step pyramid and the sands of Saqqara, in which were found dozens of tons of machined crystalline stone slabs, as well as tens of thousands of sublime ancient stone jars. Many of these were made from some of the hardest forms of igneous rock, bearing undeniable signatures of precision manufacturing, indicative of advanced technology. These jars, as well as these slabs of machined stone, have been removed from the depths here over the last century. Although the vast majority of these stone jars were found here and dated to the Third Dynasty, other examples from other parts of ancient Egypt predate Gyges and go back to the very beginnings of the dynastic civilization, and some even predate the civilization itself. Who made them and where they originally came from is still a mystery. How can we reconcile these artifacts with what we know of ancient Egypt, their tools and their building techniques? Much like the ancient ziggurats of other primitive early civilizations, the step pyramid itself fits into this story. The structure itself is, I think, the product of relatively primitive ancient civilizations. What was found beneath the pyramid, however, is most definitely not, nor are the jars found down here the result of the tools that come from ancient Egypt. How can we fit these mysteries and this evidence that is right in front of the eyes of anyone who cares to look closely enough, into the story of human civilization? My name is Ben. Welcome back to Uncharted X, and I hope you'll join me as we explore a few of the enduring enigmas still to be found at the ancient site of Saqqara in Egypt. Located just south of the Giza Plateau, the Saqqara necropolis occupies a huge area, some 7 kilometres long by about 2 kilometres wide, and probably extends further. The name Saqqara might be familiar, as it certainly has been in the news and in popular culture recently. A widely viewed Netflix documentary detailed the discoveries made over a season of archaeological digging here and the discoveries made on the site, and there has been a seemingly constant stream of press talking about finds at Saqqara. In part, I'm sure these are driven by the desire to generate tourism interest for the soon-to-be-opened Grand Egyptian Museum, but it does show that there is much more to be discovered at this ancient necropolis yet. All of these recent finds at Saqqara have been made in very shallow depths, some only barely below the surface, and they are undeniably the works of the dynastic Egyptian civilization. The Netflix documentary on this work was great. I'd recommend watching it, and unearthing more mummies and wooden boxes is always interesting. But in my opinion, they are far less interesting than the real unsolved mysteries of deeper discoveries that have been made at Saqqara in the past. Where the real mystery lies here, I think, is much further down. Below the step pyramid, below its huge cavity and its multi-piece granite box, and spread out through the bedrock of Saqqara are an estimated 5 miles of tunnels, galleries and chambers. No one really knows for sure just how extensive this tunnel system is. Early explorers reported running out of caving rope and being forced to turn around so as to not get lost down here in the darkness. Further, there are a number of credible reports from locals, such as the late well-known guide and indigenous wisdom keeper Hakim El Ayawan, of subterranean passages running for many more miles, even connecting between the major sites themselves, and that in the past a man could walk from Giza to Saqqara entirely underground. Anyone who visits Saqqara today can see the evidence for the massive amount of work that was done into the bedrock. There are huge shafts cut deep into the ground. This one is not unlike the shaft beneath the step pyramid, and under the right circumstances, you can get down into some of the catacombs here. Once you wade through the ubiquitous trash that typically fills any area off the beaten tourist path, you can quickly get a sense for just how maze-like these bedrock tunnels are. There is no doubt that this area is a necropolis. It has been used to bury the dead for millennia, and right up until fairly recent times. In fact, there are still many human remains in evidence down here in these catacombs, even rooms filled up with bones. I've had the chance to explore a little bit down here, and the sense you get is that these catacombs and tunnels most likely run everywhere beneath the ground at Saqqara, in multiple levels, and not just below the step pyramid. I wouldn't be surprised if all of these areas were connected at some point in the past. After all, the Serapeum is also located on this site, with its huge underground galleries and its mighty granite boxes. Even on that site, there is evidence for further unexplored tunnels and passages. If you're interested in knowing more about that, check out my multi-part Serapeum series. There's a link to that below in the description. Returning to the step pyramid, the shafts and tunnels below this structure were first excavated and documented in the modern era at least by French archaeologist Jean-Philippe Loyer, who recorded his findings in a series of books beginning in the 1930s. He worked on this site for decades and was responsible for the wonderfully well-done restoration of the enclosure wall and the temple structure that is next to the step pyramid. This is the one that tourists walk through every day. If you visit Saqqara, I'm sure you'll walk through this restored temple. What Jean-Philippe Loyer found down here is truly remarkable. The massive multi-piece granite box at the bottom of this huge shaft is one thing, but all around this shaft and below it, he discovered a labyrinthian network of tunnels and galleries. Some of these chambers were beautifully tiled and decorated by the dynastic Egyptians, and in places this decoration still exists even today, not that many people ever get to see it. The real treasure found down here, in my opinion, were the more than 40,000 exquisite stone jars, buried in the rubble that was found in all of these passages and galleries. A small fraction of these incredible artifacts are on display in the Cairo Museum, and I'm sure the vast bulk of them are in warehouses and other storage locations. Hopefully more of them will be displayed to the public at the new Grand Egyptian Museum, which should open sometime in 2021. I think these jars should be the subject of a modern engineering analysis. However, as far as I can tell, this has never happened in at least mainstream academic circles. Egyptologists do not seem to particularly trouble themselves with how these objects were manufactured, even though many of them are made from some of the hardest types of stone found anywhere in the world. They seem content with the assumption that these were made with primitive and simple hand tools, and typically they date them by where they were found or by the few that have hieroglyphic writing badly scratched into them. This lack of a real study is a real shame, as I think a proper investigation into just what it takes to manufacture these objects, in particular those with the most difficult characteristics, could reveal much about the truth of our past and the capabilities of our ancestors. I've mentioned these jars and vases in several of my videos, but I wanted to get into some of the specifics around just why they are so astonishing and how I think they can be explained, as well as how they fit into the story of history and the dynastic Egyptian civilization as we know it. As you can see from these early images from Jean-Philippe Loyer, these stone jars were found in amongst the broken ruins of many more thousands of pottery pieces. This is also how they're displayed in the museums, fairly primitive pottery next to exquisitely made hard stone jars. It's something of a constant source of amusement when you consider what it takes to make them versus what it takes to make the pottery. The reality is there are vast and frankly uncrossable leagues of difference in the engineering and manufacturing technology required to make pottery pieces versus that which is required for many of these stone jars. Many, if not almost all, ancient civilizations discovered and utilized pottery, many raising it up to an art form, and their various forms and styles are used to date different periods and to connect discovered pot shards to particular times in history. Pottery is a tradition that has continued unbroken down to our time and to our civilization. My grandmother was an avid potter. She had a large shed in the backyard of her home in Bowen, Australia that was full of clay blocks, kilns, potter wheels and tools. I have memories of hours spent playing at making pottery on the spinning potter wheels as a kid. As prolific and clearly functional as pottery is, ancient Egypt seems to have been one of the only ancient civilizations to also extend making these types of vessels from the hardest forms of natural igneous rock, things like granite, diorite, schist, quartz, porphyry, basalt, or even corundum, amongst others. These materials rank as 6, 7, 8, and even 9 on the Mohs scale of hardness, which is harder than iron or even steel. The Mohs scale tops out at 10 with diamond, which is the hardest substance known. So what specifically makes these jars and vases so remarkable? There are two key challenges involved in their manufacture. First of all is carving the material itself, which requires a substance harder than that which is being carved. There is no evidence of diamond use in ancient Egypt, although a substance like it must have been utilized, as many of these bear specific striations and tooling marks of something carving the stone and not simply grinding at it with abrasive powders. The fact that grinding was not the technique used is demonstrated by the observable striations and tool marks that still exist on many of these fragments. More impressive, however, is the precision with which they've been formed, and the technological implications behind this precision, as well as those of the tool marks themselves. Whatever was guiding the tools that carved these objects was a remarkable piece of technology. Many jars seem to be utterly symmetrical, perfect in their dimensions, like this piece, which is so finely balanced as to appear to stand upright on its tip, like an egg standing on its end. Others have been worked to a frankly ridiculous thinness of material, like this vase, broken in a section so that we can appreciate just how finely the very hard and brittle stone has been worked. Flinders Petrie described some vessels as being worked to, quote, an extraordinary thinness, no stouter than thin card, end quote, and yet still maintaining the same degree of symmetry and precision in manufacture. This isn't a simple task, as along with being very hard, these types of stones are also brittle when carved, and many are formed from conglomerate stones, which are made up of crystals and other materials. The tools carving them would have had to pass through very hard areas into softer stone as it worked the material, and done so without cracking or shattering the piece, which only gets more difficult as the material thins out. This bowl, discovered by Jean-Philippe Loyer in the treasure hoards beneath the Step Pyramid, has been turned so well in crystalline stone as to be translucent, an extraordinary feat of ancient advanced machining. Other pieces are fully hollowed out with long necks and narrow, undercut, flared openings. The tools that were used to carve these had to work the insides of these jars just as precisely and delicately as the outsides. I'm not sure if we've ever replicated such pieces in material like schist or porphyry, but I'd imagine it would be a most difficult task, even with our modern technology and machines. To achieve such characteristics, the symmetry and exactness in extremely difficult material like this, with primitive and simple hand tools like the ones found in the archaeological record, is frankly impossible. Despite many experimentalists carving rough stone vessels by hand and then declaring victory, replicating these specific characteristics in stone with simple hand tools has never been demonstrated. The only explanation we are left with is that mechanical assistance and power tools that were capable of a very high degree of precision, much like our computer-guided tools of today, must have been involved in their manufacture. This claim is further backed up by the tool marks left on many of these jars and vases, which undeniably show that powerful, lathe-like machinery was involved in the process. This isn't a new discovery, although it's a claim that has remained controversial for more than 100 years. The great pioneering Egyptologist Flinders Petrie was the first to truly analyse the mechanical methods involved in the creation of such objects. When we speak of Petrie, bear in mind that our own mechanical industry in our civilization was only in its infancy during his time, which was around the mid-19th century and into the early 20th. It was only at this point, roughly 150 years ago, that our civilization had developed enough capability to put these discoveries into context and to begin trying to understand the technology that these artifacts represent. If that fact doesn't mess with your noodle a little bit, I really don't know what would. Flinders Petrie analysed fragments of diorite bowls that he discovered at Giza and Saqqara, and he dated them to around the 4th dynasty. These are the same type as those found beneath the Step Pyramid. Having already discussed the evidence for large saws and tubular drills in his work, he digs into the proof for sophisticated lathe use in his book The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, published first in 1883. Quoting Flinders Petrie, quote, "The principle of rotating the tool was, for smaller objects, abandoned in favour of
I got a good sweat
rotating
going.
work.
Yeah, I did.
And the lathe appears to have been as familiar as instrument in the 4th dynasty as it is in modern workshops. The diorite bowls and vases of the Old Kingdom are frequently
Yo,
met
thanks
with
for those
and
bits,
show
man. You can really
great
appreciate that.
technical skill.
That's really cool of you.
One piece, found at Gyges number 14, shows that the method employed was true turning, and not any process of grinding, since the bowl has been knocked off of its centering, recentered imperfectly, and the old turning not quite turned out. Thus, there are two surfaces belonging to different centerings and meeting in a cusp. Such an appearance could not be produced by any grinding or rubbing process which pressed on the surface. Another detail is shown by fragment number 15. Here, the curves of the bowl are spherical and must have therefore been cut by a tool sweeping an arc from a fixed center while the bowl rotated. This center or hinging of the tool was in the axis of the lathe to the general surface of the bowl, right up to the edge of it, but as a lip was wanted, the centering of the tool was shifted, but with exactly the same radius of its arc, and a fresh cut made to leave a lip to the bowl. That this was certainly not a chance result of handwork is shown, not only by the exact circularity of the curves and their equality, but also by the cusp left where they meet. This has not been at all rounded off, as would certainly be the case in handwork, and it is a clear proof of the rigidly mechanical method of striking the curves." End quote. Petrie further commented on the use of lathes and mechanical tool rests in ancient Egypt, as well as the remarkable nature of the vases in his address to the Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland in 1884. Quote, "Not only was a rotating tool employed, but the further idea of rotating the work and fixing the tool was also familiar to the earliest Egyptians. The finest examples of turning in hard stone are in the British Museum. A small, highly polished, narrow-necked vase in diorite, or rather in transparent quartz with veins of hornblende, has its neck only 0.05 of an inch thick. A large vase of cyanide is turned, inside and out, remarkably thin, considering the size of the component crystals. But the greatest triumph is a bowl of diorite, translucent
Why do you
and
keep your legs up
full
like
of
that?
minute flaws, which must render it very
It's
brittle.
it's
Yet
for
this
my
bowl,
back.
6 inches
It feels more
diameter,
comfortable for
is
my
only
back like that.
1/40th of an inch thick over its greatest part. Just around
If
the
I put my
edge
legs
is
down, I feel too much strain on my lower back, so I do that to keep my back curved. You know what I mean?
Extraordinary thinness, no stouter than thin card.
Oh
For the use of a hook tool in turning the insides of vases, a very rigid rest or even a mechanical tool holder is almost necessary. But one specimen here shows that the early Egyptians were already familiar, not only with lathes and jeweled turning tools, but with mechanical tool rests and sweeping regular arcs in cutting. The diorite bowl, of which this piece is a fragment, has been turned as a segment of a sphere inside by a tool working from a fixed center in the axis of the lathe, with a radius of 3.94 inches. Having cut this spherical curve, the center of play of the tool was shifted about 0.5 inch higher and 0.7 inch out of the lathe axis, and a fresh arc was struck from this center of the bowl, thereby cutting out a fresh curve which left a raised lip around the edge. The proofs of this explanation of a process are found in the exact equality of the two curves, that of the bowl in general and that under the lip, in the fact of the principal surface exactly falling in with the inner edge of the lip, in the fact of the true circularity of the section of these curves, and in the cusp formed where they meet, an awkwardness which no hand turner could ever take the trouble to make, but which necessarily results from a sudden change in the center of the arc of the tool. All of these details have been worked out from very careful measurements of this piece, using successive templates of slightly varying curves to measure the exact curvature, etc. End quote. Modern-day engineer and precision manufacturing expert Christopher Dunn has followed in the footsteps of Petrie and analysed the very same diorite fragments that Petrie discovered. Thankfully, these pieces are located in the Petrie Museum in London, which permitted Chris Dunn to investigate these objects hands-on, which is exactly the type of investigation that is sorely lacking on many of the vases in places like the Egyptian Museum. Dunn's conclusions support Petrie's observation that powered machinery and precision lathes must have been used in their manufacture, and he builds on Petrie's work with his own extensive manufacturing knowledge and experience. Quoting Christopher Dunn from his book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, The relevance of ancient megalithic construction and precision cutting of igneous rock relies on engineering principles, not on geology or Egyptology. The potsherds Lehner asked to see that would change his mind about ancient Egyptian history are found in Egypt and in museums all over the world. The ones I have studied reside not in Egypt, but are situated in a glass display case in the Petrie Museum in London. The recent documentaries that have been broadcast by Egyptologists have been a distraction from what was really going on in ancient Egypt. They mislead by not addressing the incredible precision of the available artifacts. They do not address the remarkable geometry and exactness of the ancient Egyptian statues, and they have ignored evidence presented by Flinders Petrie in 1883 that proves that the ancient Egyptians used highly sophisticated methods for cutting stone, including efficient and versatile lathes. The lathe is a natural development from the potter's wheel depicted in ancient artwork and presumed to have existed in ancient Egypt. The type of potter's wheel in ancient Egypt is taken from an Egyptian relief showing the god Khnum seated at what is theorized to be a kick wheel. The potsherds in the Petrie Museum, however, are of a different quality than what can be produced on a potter's wheel or even a woodworking lathe of the kind used by underdeveloped cultures. What is depicted in figure 11.2 does not explain two potsherds that Petrie described in the pyramids and temples of Giza. As seen in the photographs of the bowl shard housed in the Petrie Museum, illustrated in Petrie's drawing is the backside convex part of a bowl shard. Petrie, however, did not discuss a more important feature of this shard, the concave surface on the opposite side of the surface he had illustrated. This is surprising because the radial gouge on the dished side of the potsherd can provide a clue as to what may have caused the bowl to be knocked off axis in the lathe, or at least another result of the bowl's displacement in the lathe. The question it raises, however, cannot be answered by conceptualizing the lathes used in ancient time that are depicted in history books. The grooves on the dish may have been the result of the material shifting on its axis, causing the tool to plunge into the material, knocking it off axis and causing the biaxial convex radius on the outside of the bowl. Because it has the impression of the geometry of the tool bit being applied to the surface, the existence of the gouge also proves Petrie's contention that the surfaces noted on his 15D were created with a single point tool and were not the result of rubbing with abrasive. This is an important point when we consider the ancient Egyptians' level of technology. Implied in the manufacturing errors may be the action of two tools at the same time, one on the outside and one on the
Looks
inside.
like it burns.
Which indicate that as the tool created the gouge
That's
on
a
the
good
inside
one.
of the bowl, it pushed
Yeah,
the bowl
Dicascan,
into a
he
component
told
of
me
the
that
chuck
one.
that was holding the bowl
You go like this?
until the stone broke under the pressure. Perhaps the most important question to ask when we try to determine how these errors were created is what kind of power was behind the lathe to allow a single point tool to cut a gouge so deep into the material that the stone would ultimately fail and break. The forces implied with this simple potsherd are not the forces associated with a potter's wheel or a spindle lathe that is spun via the manual push and pull of a strong bow. If a manually operated lathe met such resistance, it would come to a stop. To argue that only manpower was used in the process of creating this error would be to argue that the operator acquired some sort of lever to rotate the chuck that held the stone and made a conscious decision to drive the tool deeper into the diorite and ruin his or her work. Petrie's 15D shows the versatility of the lathe employed to create it. As seen in figure 11.4, the surface is double dish-shaped with tantalizing telltale shallow striations on the surface. These striations would not be out of place on a modern artifact created on a lathe when a tool which had made a cut across the surface was reversed across the same path it took when it made the cut. The grooves shown just below the cusp indicate that as the bowl turned in the lathe, the tool moved rapidly across the surface. When I first examined these pieces physically by running a finger across the surface of the dished out stone, they were smooth, machined surfaces with no dips or high spots. When we take these into consideration, along with the sharp cusp and the scratches in the surface in Petrie's 15D and the deep groove in his 14D, the implication is
How
that
much
the
do I weigh?
use of a
I
lathe
weigh
that was under
185.
significant power and that the rotary axis of the bowl and rotation of the tool were dependent upon precise bearings. This technology pushes the envelope further. Considering that the pyramids were crafted with such precision, is it surprising to find circumstantial evidence that proves that exact and robust machine tools existed in prehistory? Such machines did not just saw blocks for the pyramids and temples, but they also crafted delicate and precise stonework, such as the Ramses statue and the stone bowl fragments discovered by Petrie. Could we recreate the granite and basalt boxes in the Serapeum without employing some fairly sophisticated machinery? If we did not have the materials to devise such machinery, had not developed an understanding of metrology, and were without an inventory of instruments to measure precisely, how would we achieve these miracles in stone? Is anyone today willing to take on the fabrication of an Apis bull box? End quote. Despite this clear evidence of lathe use, and the fact that Egyptology firmly dates these vases and jars to the Old Kingdom, many of modern Egyptology academics do not credit the Old Kingdom with the knowledge nor use of the wheel. This is because there really isn't any evidence for the wheel outside of
Only
these
145?
artifacts, that is, not in their writings,
That's KCL3.
and not in the
No
tools
worries.
that we found.
There's no
From these times used
there's no good or
sleds
bad
rather
with
than
weights.
wheels,
It's
and we know sleds were
I'm
used
not. I
to
don't think
drag
there's good or
stone
bad with
blocks for
height or
some
good
of
or
the
bad with
building
weight.
projects.
It's I mean like in terms of like healthy
Definitely
weight,
developed
you
use of the
know.
wheel over time, but most academics
Only
believe that
145? Are you
occurred
serious, Nick?
after the
Wow.
Old Kingdom.
I thought
This contradiction
I thought
about
you'd
the
be
use of the
more, but I don't
wheel
know.
in Old Kingdom
But you're
Egypt
super lean, man.
is
You're like
but
Bruce
one of
Lee, man.
many in the story of this early phase of history. Contradictions that are exposed by an analysis of the
Oh,
objects
man.
that allegedly come from that period. If the ancient Old Kingdom Egyptians did not have the technology of the wheel, and they utilized simple flint or copper hand
Yo,
tools,
Dick, you're
how
145
can
and
we
you're
conclude that they
freaking
did,
wielding
in fact,
50-pound
manufacture
dumbbells.
these
That's crazy, dude.
This question leaves us with two possible answers. Either they had vastly more
Yo,
capability
how
and
about these
far more
Olympics, eh?
sophisticated tools than
Watching
we could,
the women weightlifters
or
lifting
they
more
didn't
than I
make
can
them at
lift.
all.
I love it. It's so
The
humbling.
possibility that these objects are older than the Egyptians, that they were made by a more advanced
Weight can be deceiving. I don't look
precursor
145.
civilization,
Yeah, it's
that
true.
the kings of
It's
Egypt
true, buddy.
inherited them,
That's a good
used
point.
them, and found them to be as utterly astonishing as we do, is only further strengthened by the many other contradictions in this story. One such contradiction comes from understanding just how these objects themselves are dated by Orthodox Egyptology. As there is no accurate method to date stone objects like these, the dating comes from two primary sources: the context around where they were found, and any
I think
writing
we're gonna
that was
end this
on
session
or
with watching
around
women's
them.
weightlifters lifting more
Let's
than
look
I
at the
can.
writing first, as Jean-Philippe Loyer documented in detail many examples of glyphs carved into these objects, and you can witness them yourself in the hallways and cabinets of the Egyptian Museum. Some of you will have heard my perspective on this before, as it applies not only to the writing on these jars, but also to that found on many other precisely carved objects, like boxes, slabs, columns, obelisks, and statues. Like these larger objects, these smaller stone jars are remarkable in that they have been perfectly finished, in many cases symmetrical, and have been polished to a very fine and utterly smooth surface. We simply do not see
Okay,
these same characteristics.
one more bench press and one more
reflected
bicep
in
curl,
the
and then I think I'm
hieroglyphic
done.
writing.
But thanks
In
for being
fact,
here.
on many of these beautiful stone jars, the writing is very crude, as if it was roughly hammered into the surface, clearly the result of hand tools like flint chisels.
Yeah, one more
This
bench
is a
press, one
huge
more
contradiction.
bicep curl.
If you have the capability to precisely carve and polish stone, including inside sharp angles, and the ability to create objects with perfect circularity, symmetrical dimensions, or objects with straight
Thank you
lines,
for being here,
why can't you
CL13
do that for the
TV,
writing?
Dick, Barra.
These glyphs are
Cloud9,
clearly the result
Blue
of
Fire,
hand tools and chisels,
Spottier 4.
and it reflects a technology
Appreciate
level
it
that
very
is
much.
far below that which has been used to make the object itself. Once again, we see a tremendous mismatch in levels of technology between the writing and the artifact, yet Orthodox history insists that it was the same people doing both. It doesn't make logical sense, but we can start to understand it when we look at these artifacts through the lens of inheritance and a longer timeline. The other element of dating these jars comes from the context around where they were found. As previously previously mentioned, more than 40,000 of them were found beneath the step pyramid, some in chambers with writing on the walls, and much of this context
Cool,
firmly
cool.
places these
Nice.
burials to the
You inspired me to
time of
knock out
Joseph
5
and the
reps of
third
100-pound
dynasty,
arm press. That's
around
crazy,
roughly
man.
2680 BC, or some 4,500
You're welcome, yo, thanks.
years ago. No doubt that reflects the
Arnold
time that these
presses,
were
man. That's
interred
crazy stuff,
underground,
man.
even if it can't speak to the date of their manufacture. However, this isn't the only place in Egypt that objects like these have been discovered. The astonishing and somewhat notorious schist disc is a famous ancient relic, housed in the Egyptian Museum, although they do keep moving it around and I've had to hunt to find it every time I visit. This is called a decorative vase by Egyptology, but there have been several efforts by independent researchers to recreate it and to study its shape in an effort to discover any functional properties that it might have had. I've read all sorts of speculation about this piece. Looking at it, with its circular hole in the center, certainly does conjure up images of it spinning or being some component of a larger machine. Now, whether you think this was functional or not, I think we can all agree that it is an incredible bit of stone masonry, carved from a single piece of very hard and
Let
brittle
your weight
schist.
limit you. Yeah,
While
really.
it was once whole, it was discovered broken and has been repaired in modern times. Surprisingly, the schist disc wasn't found in a 4th dynasty burial, and it wasn't found beneath the step pyramid. Rather, it was discovered in a tomb from the very 1st dynasty of ancient Egypt, a tomb that was closed up and sealed some 600 years before the time of Joseph and the 3rd dynasty. Consider what it would take to manufacture the schist disc, and ask yourself if it looks like the sort of capability a civilization could develop in its very earliest phases. I consider this 1st dynasty dating to simply be but the latest possible date for this object, somewhere around 3100
4 or 5
BC.
pounds, lift 2 pound dumbbells.
All we can really say with any
Box
confidence
75
is
pounds
that
every
that
day.
is when it was buried. We
Yeah.
simply don't know when it was made.
That's crazy, man.
It may well have been already ancient at that time.
And technique. 75 pounds? That's crazy,
And
man.
we really have no idea if it was manufactured during the 1st dynasty or whether it was inherited and recognized for what it was, an incredible piece
Yeah.
of engineering, thus valuable and so deemed worthy for the burial treasure of Prince.
64!
Despite this, simply because it was found in Prince Sabu's tomb, Orthodox Egyptology declares that there is no need and that it must have been made during the time that he lived. Let's put this into some modern context. Consider if one of these wonderful vases found beneath the step pyramid was, say, in a private collection somewhere in the world today, as I'm sure many of them are. Imagine that the owner of said private collection died, and according to their instructions were buried in a mausoleum, along with their prized possessions, including this ancient stone vessel. Imagine 5,000 years from now, in the future, this mausoleum was rediscovered by a new civilization that was living here on Earth. Should they infer that all the objects buried with this rich collector was made during their time? Do you not think that the royalty and aristocracy of ancient Egypt would have also placed
thanks,
value
Rue.
on objects that they found to be ancient?
Alright,
It's a simple thought experiment. And
so
it
that's
shines a
my
light on the
workout.
very tenuous lines of so-called
I'm gonna pull up some
proof
videos
that is
of,
used by
let me show
academia
you.
to categorically state that these artifacts were all made by the dynastic Egyptians. Some objects go back even further. This is one of my favorite pieces.
I wrote on
a
the back of the
machined
previous
tool of
paper, which
lapis
is why you
lazuli
can't
with
really
a
see
gold
what's
sheath.
written, but
It is simply labelled pre-dynastic, and I can't help but laugh every time I see
8
it,
sets of bench
as it's
press,
housed in a
7
cabinet
bicep
along with
curls
pottery
sets,
shards, bone ornaments,
3
and
fly
other objects
sets,
of the late Stone Age.
3 leg raises
Presumably
sets,
because that was the
11
context around which it
V-sits,
was
5
found.
exercise bikes,
But it
4
would be
yoga
much closer to the
sets,
truth
and
to say that it's an
8
out-of-place object,
plyometric
and we
sets.
simply don't know how old it is. I don't
Bara.
think there's even any source
A
for lapis
philosophy.
in Egypt. We really have no idea where this came from or how it got there. All we can say is that it was found in the remains of a pre-dynastic site, in the
Here,
possession
let's
of
look up
whatever
women
people
weightlifters
existed in Egypt
outlifting
before the mighty dynastic
what I can
civilization
lift.
even got started. Precision carved stone vases get older, much older. On my most recent trip to Egypt, in the
64 kg.
Put her in the lead in this particular category.
Wow.
Does that nicely.
That's fucked, man.
There we go.
That's so fucked.
Easy for her. She's happy about that.
That's like
Now it's on to the
230.
clean and jerk. So she holds on to the lead.
I've never
there.
tried this though. I've
is
never
her
tried this.
second attempt at 128 kilograms.
I've never tried like deadlift over the head.
Boom, there we go. Gets it up, clean and jerk, 128 kilograms. Now we're gonna get you out to the competition. It was matched by the Italian. They're still going. Heaviest weight wins. Joan O'Farr, Michael Breeze have the live call.
I have to be in the meeting in 54 minutes.
Canadian,
Oh
in
man.
contention for gold.
Sarah's done right is to have a shot at the silver medal. Sarah.
Soll ich aufmachen, Jungs? Einzelchat.
Boom or bust for Sarah Davis.
Oh, ich trau mich nicht.
Well, Sharon at 128 unsuccessful. 131.
Gut, Enzo! Hat wirklich einer Scheiße geschickt. Hat wirklich einer Scheiße geschickt.
It's there. Can she stand still? Yes, she can, and she lets out the cry of joy. 3 white lights from the referee, 2:36 total. With the head in hands, Morcheron, you might just have done enough. In the lead. I cannot see anybody else catching her. Surely we're looking at the Olympic champion.
Oh, that's cool.
Morcheron
So
of Canada
they
stands
take the
and focuses.
you have 3 attempts and you choose the weights and then it's the sum of the top 2
Fantastic.
successful attempts, I guess.
Staggers to recover.
I don't recommend doing what they do.
She's got it.
Yeah.
Look at the reaction from the coaching staff. What a
Yeah,
powerful
really.
lift for the Canadian. She sits on 236 total.
Oh, the cut off the German. Only Canadians. Alright. That was crazy. Are the Paralympics after the Olympics? When are the Paralympics this year? I wonder. Oh yeah, we watched this before, remember Dick? This is such a sick friggin'... This is sick.
And here's a man on a mission, really pumped up, asking the crowd for extra support. That's the buzz of adrenaline that you get in this kind of situation. Side of Egypt.
He gets silver.
This for the silver. 235 kilos.
235 kilos is like 500 pounds. It's crazy.
He's guaranteed at least the bronze, but he wants more. Well, he really wants the silver, doesn't he? Look to the scoreboard, and he's got it! Well, missed the 2:31 on his second, absolutely nailed from 2:35 on his third and final lift. And that pushes him up into the silver medal.
305 kilos.
That was sick.
305 kilos, rack height 20. Amigos, por favor, montar barra com 305 quilos, suporte 20.
It's crazy, man.
Well, there's the coach's celebration in the warm-up room. I'm not sure what the suspension is like on the chairs, but he was testing it there. Big hugs.
$250 kilograms, and interestingly,
I do have to go though after this video. I gotta go. Thank you though. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Ro Cooper, for being here. Bara, Dick, of course, CL13 for the following being here.
certainly Pavlos Mamalos, the Greek, who we'll see a little later
Fire
on.
Phoenix,
and
Cloud9.
the Egyptian Hani
Everybody appreciate it very
Abdelhadi.
much.
They've certainly set the bar very high with their
Flex
opening list, because they're going to go for well, you can see
history.
Abdelhadi there. He's going to attempt a first lift of 230 kilograms, and Mamalos of Greece 231. That's the Chinese K. He's going to try for 225, and they are expected
Could be better.
to be the top three. But of course, we can have props, and it's not absolutely
Could be better.
impossible that somebody from Group B could set a benchmark so high that they actually end up taking a medal. It doesn't happen very often, but it's entirely possible.
Oh, this is long.
Iran years ago, and 10 years ago now nearly, in October 2002. First lift at 165. Well, it looks good. Oh, it's a no lift. It's a no lift. There are 3 judges. The competitor needs at least 2 of the 3 votes for it to be a good lift. He's obviously not got the standard for the Group A. They wanted to expect one man. That's for 172.
Okay, I gotta go though. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Dick, I'm sorry to hear about your meeting, man. See ya, yo, sick. Thanks, Bara. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for being here, man. You're the dude, man. Oh, wait. Catch you later. Thanks, man. Appreciate it, buddy. Dick, I'm sorry about your meeting, man. I hope it goes okay, dude.
Jaber of Iraq successfully lifted 180 with his first lift. Now he's going for 190.
That was great. I feel like I'm not even on antibiotics after that workout. I feel great. Okay. Jabber. I'm not being racist. I like, you know, jab. That's not racist. I swear. Alright, I'm just gonna sign off. Oh, wait.